Well, all is set for the inauguration ceremony that shall be taking center stage on Wednesday this very week. Last week, Parliament passed the Sexual Offences Bill, a private bill brought by MP Monica Amodeng. The bill has attracted quite some traction in the public eye, and the civil society organizations that backed it have turned against it. Why? To discuss some of its merits, Elizabeth Kemigisha from FIDA joins us right now on NTV at 1. Very good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Well, the civil society organizations that helped the MPs work on this bill are now turning against it. The public would like to know why.
First, we must appreciate that there's a lot of work that got into the sexual offences bill. And it's one of the laws in this country that we saw feminist organizations, clergy, women's groups coming together to support the MPs in drafting of this bill, because there's a lot of hope in it. But that's why it was touching something very critical, sexual violence in this country. If reports from the police are anything to go by, from 2010, you will see there's been an increasing number of cases of sexual violence.
Compounded by the pandemic now.
Yes, you see, with the pandemic in place, there's a lot happening. So we thought this is a very good step to have a law to put together all these offenses, to put together all these penalties and sort of just have everything in one law. However, we were very disappointed because at the end, and I think this is a process that many times as laws go through the discussion in plenary, they keep on changing. And, you know, we advised, we gave recommendations, institutions like Akina Mama, institutions like ONET, institutions like FIDA, gave in, you know, all these recommendations saying, let this be at the center, because we are trying to legislate for victims. We're trying to protect the victim at the end of the day, right?
Okay, here's what we want to know. There were already penalties for offenses such as rape, sexual assault, and prostitution. Why buttress them in this law, yet you haven't talked about homosexuality to begin with?
Yes, of course, yeah, I'll talk about that just very briefly. Yes, we have the Penal Code Act that was speaking about offenses like rape, like defilement, but they had their defects. And what the Sexual Offences Bill was trying to do, to try to correct those wrongs, I fear that we haven't done it. We see that marital rape, a core part of sexual offenses in this country, was removed from the 2016 version through 2019. It was removed, and the one that has been recently passed, it was removed. We also see that sexual exploitation as part of maybe one of the good things that came out of the act. But one that is concerning for civil society right now is removal of the clause of withdrawal of consent during sexual activity. So what we are saying essentially that rape is legal in this country. And we saw the mockery, you know, with which parliamentarians were discussing this last week before the bill was passed. It's very questionable. It's their mandate as MPs to propose these laws, to debate them, and legislate for the whole country.
Indeed. And Kemigisha, this law also comes in the wake of women activists calling for, you know, a creation of a conducive environment for the sex workers to be able to do their work. What do you make of this?
Of course, it's taken back all the work that has been done by institutions, by women's rights institutions that do work on sex work. And when you speak about homosexuality and unnatural offenses, because we already have the Penal Code Act having a whole lot of burden on LGBTI persons and then on sex workers and the way they do their work. So just bringing this other law, one, is a wastage of taxpayers' money, because you're re-legislating what is already in place. Then you bring it back to legislate again. We know that there's going to be continued violence. Actually, there's going to be heightened violence towards these minority groups, which I do not think that our parliamentarians took into consideration as they discussed the bill.
Kemigisha, for a law that has been in Parliament for over 10 years, don't you think it is contentious how this final version is looking? And do you think there will be problems when it comes to implementation?
I worry. I don't even want to think about how much resources have gone into, you know, the Sexual Offences Bill and then the version that has been finally passed. It's not a reflection of what the core purpose of this bill was and what civil societies like FIDA were working towards. So we are extremely disappointed, and we are hoping that at the end of the day, the president can listen to some of these prayers, recall it back to Parliament, and have it reviewed to speak to especially those clauses that I've talked about. You know, withdrawal of consent, one on sexual harassment, to speak to sexual harassment in all other spaces where we know it happens.
I'm afraid we've run out of time, but thank you for your time, Elizabeth Kemigisha, for coming through.
Thank you.
Well, she's from FIDA. You're still watching NTV at 1. Let's take a breather. Return.